Benjamin Disraeli once famously stated that there are three kinds of lies in this world: lies, damn lies, and statistics. And there is no clearer evidence of this dynamic at play than in the guidance that business leaders and HR pros are receiving when it comes to what makes workers happy. Now, the gap that's between those responsible for what happens in the workplace and how workers actually feel seems to be getting wider by the day. But market forces are starting to tip the scales back towards sanity. And the big question is, will it stick? And if so, for how long? Come on back, we're going to break it down for you. Hey folks, Mark here with The Rational Workforce. Thanks so much for tuning in. Now, for those of you who don't already know, my day job is as a B2B marketing strategist and consultant, and the lion's share of my work is within the HR technology sector. So I tend to stick pretty close to workplace-related themes and issues and all manner of things that kind of impact that world. Now, pundits and power brokers in that space have long relied on surveys and polls and questionnaires to set their content agenda, and that in turn sets the policies and practices of the workplace and what goes on there around the country and around the globe. Now, of course, not every survey truly aligns with reality. There's always some level of dissonance or bias or sample size issues that get in the way, and that's why it's always good to take such guidance with a grain of salt. But when it comes specifically to the issue of politics and activism in the workplace, the gap between the real world and the isolated utopias that statisticians seem to live in, that gap is really more like a canyon. Now, starting in the late 2010s and accelerating in 2020, there have been lots of surveys that have highlighted how much employees want employers to play the dual role of paycheck provider and political activist. In fact, this article from Crane's List references a Deloitte study stating that workers want their employees' values, ranging from social, racial, and gender equity to care for the environment, to align with their own. So much so that 78% of those surveyed employees say that they prefer to work for a purpose-driven company. Cool, right? Seems pretty cut and dry, right? Well, not so fast, my little social justice warrior. Recently, those deeply held convictions of employers have been tested, and we've seen company after company walk away. Now, if you're a regular viewer of this channel, you've probably caught some of our coverage of these dynamics. But companies like Bud Light and John Deere and Tractor Supply Company and Target and Jack Daniels and a whole bunch of others are now taking bold and decisive steps in the opposite direction, moving away from what those polls seem to show. More recently, Lexus and their parent company Toyota have joined those ranks. And in an official statement, Toyota said that it will encourage an inclusive environment where diversity of thought can flourish. And they'll also work to ensure that the activities and events are focused on professional development, networking, mentoring, and volunteering. The team member engagement must drive our business. Now, to me, that seems like a sensible, measured, pragmatic stance that will benefit everyone, not just a few select groups and not stuff at the expense of other people, programs that will truly lift all boats. But if you look at the coverage, the so-called impartial journalists chalk all of this up to just the action of mean old right-wing activists or variations on a theme thereof. Now, of course, there have been commentators like Robbie Starbuck who have been a catalyst for all of this. But there's a mounting body of evidence suggesting that political activism at both the corporate and the executive level can actually trigger a cascading set of negative outcomes that have little to do with partisan politics and everything to do with creating massive blind spots and self-inflicted wounds that hurt businesses at the most fundamental level. Now, here are just a few examples. HR technology provider HiBob, they're a really cool company, recently released a study stating that 77% of employees and managers want to avoid political discussions at work, and that's up significantly from the poll they did last year, where that number was at 61%. This Forbes article highlights a Gallup and Bentley University study revealing that Americans who say businesses should take a public stance on current events is waning significantly, down to just 38%. That's a 10% drop from the previous year. And even Mark Zuckerberg from Facebook, or Meta, one of the world's wealthiest and influential business leaders, is backing away from his activist stance. In a recent New York Times piece, he highlighted just how disenfranchised he was by Washington politics and even acknowledged and laments how much influence he allowed the Biden administration to have over Meta's business practices. Now, Zuckerberg even went so far as to write a letter to Congress where he admitted several things that were once believed to be exclusive realm of conspiracy theorists and right-wing nutjobs. Namely, that Facebook censorship of COVID-19 information, Facebook censorship of allegations of corruption within the Biden family, Facebook's promotion of non-existent Russian disinformation campaigns, and certain topics surrounding campaign integrity. All of those things were real. They really happened. And here's a direct quote. In 2021, senior officials from the Biden administration, including the White House, repeatedly pressured our teams for months to censor certain COVID-19 content, including humor and satire, and expressed a lot of frustration with our teams when we didn't agree. And Zuckerberg also stated that in a separate situation, the FBI warned us about a potential Russian disinformation operation about the Biden family and Burisma in the lead up to the 2020 election. So, look, now maybe you can lighten up on the folks with the tinfoil hats, please. You've got to admit that they have been more right than wrong in these past couple years. But I understand if you still don't feel completely comfortable listening to the conspiracy theorists about how duplicitous people in power can be. So maybe we'll listen to the Wall Street Journal. Now, according to the September 28th, 2024 article, there's new research from the Academy of Management that highlights that companies with stridently political CEOs are more likely to engage in corporate misconduct. Thomas Feuer, who is an assistant professor of strategic management at Rutgers University and lead author of this paper, stated that it boils down to an elevated sense of self-worth and a degree of entitlement. He further stated that these individuals create an us versus them mentality that discounts the opinions of others, as well as creates an unwarranted sense of moral superiority. They grant themselves a moral license, then use that license to rationalize their own bad behaviors. Now, later in this article, Feuer also stated how this type of leadership creates political echo chambers within the organizations, and it really does create a conformist culture within. So in other words, ironically, those companies who position themselves as champions of the downtrodden actually create environments that are significantly less empathetic to the needs of others. And if you want to see this in action, you actually don't have to flip too far back into America's history books. Just look at what happened in the wake of those horrific October 7th, 2023 Hezbollah attacks in Israel, and how some universities and businesses placed their political leanings on full display when they let anti-Semitism run rampant, often with very little pushback or retribution to the people that were doing those actions. Now, this behavior, I contend, is a direct result of years of activist employees being coddled and supported, no matter how narrow their focus or how exclusionary their behaviors. Activist employees created workplaces where internal agitators were lionized and protected, and by encouraging them to weaponize well-intentioned policies originally designed to help elevate all workers, they got this belief that they were above reproach. They had the absolute and unwavering belief that preventing American Jews from safely moving from one campus building to another was justified. I mean, these assholes actually thought they were the good guys. Until, after years of increasingly vocal and unchecked fucking around, the companies began to enact the find out portion of that FAFO equation. And surprisingly, Google was among the first to lead the charge. Now, in early spring 2024, Google fired 28 employees who were inciting and participating in anti-Israel protests and embarked on something they called a mission-first mindset, one that's aimed at getting the business back to focusing on, well, businessy things. Now, whether you actually believe Google is dialing back on the partisanship, or maybe it's just going undercover, that's totally up to you. Based on how their search results are behaving during this election cycle, I'm not so sure they're fully back to embracing their original don't be evil roots, because, well, the people running the show there are still overwhelmingly supportive of one narrow view of the world. But still, they did nip this in the bud, and they came out publicly against it, and they took some action, and you got to give credit where credit is due. So good job, Google. So maybe the tide really is turning. maybe those exclusionary practices that we've been seeing take over the workplace for the past several years are finally going away, and a more rational, more middle ground approach is actually in the works. If that's the case, we still have a lot of ground to make up, but the signs are somewhat encouraging. Now, if I've said it once, I've said it 100 times. If you want to attract and employ and sell to a diverse audience, you got to have diverse views. Otherwise, you're going to form these ideological bubbles, and at best, you're going to alienate 50% of your potential workforce and 50% of your potential customer base. But that's enough about what I think about the matter. I want to hear what you think. So please leave your thoughts in the comments section below and tell me where your head is at on this. Do you feel like activism at work is starting to die away? Or are employers just playing it safe for a little bit to see how this election goes? No matter how you personally feel about the topic, no matter where you come down on this, I just ask you to remember this, that when it comes right down to it, we have way more things in common than we have that separate us. And yes, even that guy from accounting who still believes everything that CNN tells him to believe, when push comes to shove, we've got to have each other's backs. We're all in this together. Don't let them get under your skin. So thanks for tuning in, folks. If you liked what you saw, don't forget to click like, hit subscribe, ring the bell, do all the things on the way out that's going to help the channel to keep growing. And I can't wait to talk to you on the next one. We'll catch you later. See ya.